Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. So in today's video we are going to continue on with reviewing all of the Group 1 vehicles, this time once again going back to a classic and perhaps one of the most iconic prototype vehicles to ever exist. This is the Porsche 962C. This car was on the scene for around about a decade, running from 1984 to around about 1993, both in factory and privateer hands. This was perhaps one of the most successful prototypes of all time. Now in terms of getting this car, you can pay around about 2.6 mil for it, but you can also get it for free by completing the Master License International A license. So in terms of a price point, you can essentially get this car at no cost to yourself and get a absolutely amazing vehicle for your collection. Now to begin with, I'm going to talk about something a little bit different because there is kind of an elephant in the room, and that is the fact that the car is a little bit wrong and all over the place in terms of the 926C that we're seeing here. So in terms of the livery itself, this one is supposed to represent the Rothmans livery from, you know, the Porsche. It's perhaps one of the, if not the most iconic livery to ever be, I guess, put across this vehicle. However, it is a little bit wrong. So the livery that we're kind of representing here is actually from the 1985 season, which was driven by Jackie Ickx and Jochen Mass. However, the actual car itself is titled the 1988, which I believe at the time ran the Dunlop liveries, which I believe were, I think, bright yellow with sort of like red on them and black all built in, racing in the same year as the Jaguar XJR9, which you would have seen probably a few days back at this point in terms of this video releasing. So in terms of the vehicle itself, yes, it's a little bit wrong in terms of its representation in game, but that is nowhere near taking away from just how legendary this vehicle is. So the 926C is obviously a variant of the 962. Overall, it was perhaps one of the most iconic Le Mans prototype racing vehicles to ever exist, running for around about a decade. Obviously by the end of its life cycle, over such a long career, of course it started to become a little bit outdated, to say the least. But yes, this car had many different variants, many different forms, from IMSA, prototype racing, Le Mans, all that kind of stuff. So it did have many different versions to run with. Now in terms of 962, it did come along in, I believe, the 1984 season, obviously running up to around about 1993 in terms of being on the sort of main stage. A lot ended up, as they typically do, in privateer hands. A lot of sort of Porsche prototype and, you know, Le Mans vehicles do end up in privateer hands, as well as obviously factory backing as well. Now in terms of this vehicle, it's quite difficult to kind of talk about it, so I'll talk about the one that is liveried first. So in terms of the 1985 version, which we are kind of seeing the livery for, this vehicle itself did end up achieving a third place overall, and Porsche, Rothmans Porsche should I say, did end up taking the first place for the team. So relatively successful overall. Obviously in terms of its overall achievements, there is so many to list that in all honesty I'd probably be here all day just talking about how successful this car was in terms of sports car racing. And that's going to bring me on to just the design itself. The 962 for me is perhaps one of the most iconic race cars to ever grace any racing scene. I think if you ask someone to, I guess, draw a outline or a silhouette of what they think a Le Mans prototype or a car that run Le Mans should look like, I honestly think they would probably draw up something that looks kind of just like this. Obviously if we're asking someone every day who may not even know about racing to just kind of draw a silhouette, they'd probably aim towards something that looks like this. And I think that's again part of the reason why this car was around so long, that it's kind of ingrained in many people's memories. So the main question is, how does it actually perform in GT7? And for me, it's a bit of an oddball car. So yes, of course, it ran in the Group C regulations, it ran through all the change-ups and stuff like that. But for me, it doesn't quite sit in the same category as some of the other Group C monsters that you see, mainly the main three, which is sort of the Sauber, the Jaguar and the 787B. It kind of sits just outside them. And in terms of the performance, it's kind of the same story as well. It has relatively weaker performance across the board compared to those main three. However, this car is just no slouch. There is no denying that the performance of this thing is still to this day absolutely ridiculous. You know, in terms of the turbo lag and such, which is there, it isn't as high as something like, say, the Suzuki Escudo, where it's very noticeable. There is just a slight delay as it puts the power down and the turbo spewls up, and then it obviously gets itself underway. It's very, very slight, and you may not notice it straight away, but I guarantee the next time you try this car, now I've mentioned that if you are running this standard version, you will perhaps notice the turbo lag that is present on this vehicle. However, it is definitely no slouch. It will accelerate very, very quickly. It hits a relatively high top speed, again, compared to some of the, I guess, top 3 group machines, group C machines that you'll see. Overall, it doesn't hit those relative highs. Those cars are good for anywhere from 210 to upwards of 230 miles per hour. This will sit relatively comfortably around about just under the 200 mark to around about spot on the 200 miles per hour mark. So it does have a good top speed. Again, the acceleration, especially for the time period that this car was around, is lightning fast. It is nothing to kind of turn your nose up at. It is a very, very quick car. In terms of the handling though, this is where I would say this car stands out from a lot of the other more historic Group 1 machinery that we see in GT7. It's a relatively easy car to drive, which is kind of a good thing towards a car, and I have heard reports, especially on the Porsche website, that it is a very accessible car in terms of being able to be driven. By no means would it necessarily be easy, but I definitely think in terms of GT7, it really does show. This thing is very, very grippy. It doesn't really want to break away. I think I found with like the XJR9 that one wanted to be very skittish at the rear end and move out, but to be honest, with the 962C, there's just none of that. It's just an absolute pleasure to drive, and I think if you're going to get into the historic cars, this is a great starting point. So let's have a look at the overall lap time for the 962C. So overall, it comes in 10th place. As you can see, it is up against a bunch of other Group 1 vehicles. Currently leading the way is my previous review on the TS050, which will be coming up sooner than later to get re-reviewed. In terms of the other Group C machinery around it, we've got the XJR9, which currently tops the classics with a 601.200, the Sauber, which is a 601.7, and then a 602.6, just under a second down. The 962 really does hold its own, even though it kind of sits outside the sort of 787B XJR9 Sauber range. In all honesty, I think this is a fantastic car. If you want to kind of, I guess, learn the way of driving these historic rocket ships from Group C era, then in all honesty, I'd say the 962C is perhaps the best way to begin that. So there we go, the Porsche 962C is now reviewed, and to be honest, this is a fantastic vehicle. Yes, you can get it for free, which definitely boosts it up the ratings. Whilst it is a little bit off of those kind of main three, this is certainly a car that you should definitely pick up at least some point while playing GT7. It's an absolute blast to drive, and to go with it, it's perhaps the most iconic prototype silhouette of all time. Thanks so much for watching. If you do enjoy this, I am trying to currently work my way through all of the Group 1 cars before giving them a definitive ranking based on all of these reviews. Thanks so much for watching. Later on, for the next Group 1 review, we will have a more modern LMP1 prototype car, and then we'll obviously go back into the VGT Group 1s. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you later on. Take care, guys. Peace.